Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I did a
Let me check.
Up in Vermont. One, I was really impressed. One thing, basically, so I'm, sure you make he came in there. They're about 5 inches taller than you and whiter. Like, I literally was like,
Hey, how's it going?
you can see the bus by like, but it's like, it's like I surround myself. Nobody, and I surround myself. Nobody.
Otherwise, I'll put it on.
Nobody's. That was just, I was like, okay. No, that's what he was like. He's like, the matter here.
They're a name tag, but you're gonna move them around. You're like, oh. Tracy, I think you're right in front of yours.
Here?
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. I didn't see all that.
Oh, I'm next to you on the other side.
Oh, okay.
Oh, this is interesting.
I love it.
Be sure there's an insert anywhere.
Oh, so we don't. The heck? Oh, it unscrews. Here I am like.
Okay, and we're gonna start the stream in 5, 4, 3.
I'm from around the way.
Hello, everyone. How we doing? All right. Thank you for being here. Good evening, everyone. As we get settled, my name is Raul Fernandez. I'm the Executive Director of Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity. I'll accept applause. I don't mind. That was like one person. That's great. Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity, or BRJE, is a grassroots organization dedicated to dismantling systemic racism and advancing policies that promote racial and social justice in our community. Through advocacy, education, and direct action, we work to challenge inequities in education, housing, policing, and governance while building spaces and for communities of color to thrive. We believe that justice is not inevitable. It is something that we create together through organizing, persistence, and an unshakable belief in a more equitable future. We invite you to join us by becoming BRJE members. Those in person can do so by scanning the QR code on the card in front of you. Those online can navigate to the membership tab at brje.org. On behalf of all of our board and staff, I want to warmly welcome you to tonight's event, Racial Justice in the Courts, Legal Strategies and Challenges for the Next 4 Years. Whether you're here with us in person at Brookline Town Hall or joining us online thanks to our friends at Brookline Interactive Group, we are grateful for your presence and your commitment to justice in a time that demands our vigilance, our courage, and our collective action. We are honored tonight to be joined by a distinguished panel of legal experts who are on the front lines of the fight for social justice. We have tonight with us Virginia Bensan, hello, Director of Racial Justice Advocacy for the Massachusetts Law Reform Institute. Jessica Chico, Director of New Americans Initiatives at the Massachusetts Immigration and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, or we know it as MIRA. Tracy Griffith, Director of Racial Justice Programs at the ACLU of Massachusetts. and Rasan Hall, President and CEO of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. Please welcome them. Oh, I'm sorry, Eric. I stopped. Erica Richmond Walton, of course. I'm sorry, Erica. Litigation fellow at Lawyers for Civil Rights as well. Thank you. Please. Erica and I go way back. Apologize. In a moment, I'll introduce our moderator as well. What I want to say about these panelists first is that their insights will help us understand the shifting legal and political landscape, and importantly, how we can organize to defend and expand our rights. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the gravity of this moment, not just for those of us in this time, but for those who may be watching this recording decades from now. To future generations looking to this civil rights era for understanding, wondering how we responded during this time of rising fascism and amidst the resurgence of white supremacy, racism, xenophobia, and transphobia, as well as Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. During this time of attacks on our most basic and shared humanity, let it be known that the people of Brookline, Massachusetts and its neighbors gathered here to strategize, to organize, and to sharpen our commitment to resist the level of tyranny that most of us had only read about. Let it be known that we did not sit idly by, but that we stood together in this moment. That we gathered not in despair, but in determination. That we understood the power of solidarity, and also the power of the law as both a weapon of oppression and a tool for liberation. And that by standing together, by staying the course, by never wavering in our commitment to a more just world, we knew that another outcome was possible. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening's conversation, Boston University law professor Jonathan Feingold. Professor Feingold is a legal scholar whose work examines the intersections of race and law. His scholarship has been instrumental in exposing how legal frameworks are often weaponized to entrench inequality. Professor Feingold is the co-host of the popular Race Class podcast, available on SoundCloud. He also co-wrote the now widely circulated memo defending DEI programs as lawful, which was signed by law professors throughout the country. He brings to this conversation a deep understanding of the stakes before us and an unwavering commitment to using the law as a force for justice. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jonathan Feingold.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you, panelists. Really honor for me to be here with you all. And thanks everyone for coming. I think the most important thing to do is to join BRJE if you are not yet a member, because you can't build something if you don't have something, and BRJE is building something. I also am a little under the weather, and so generally I'd be a little higher energy than I'm going to be tonight. But I am really glad to be here. Raul did not overstate anything. We are in incredibly terrifying moment in the history of this country and the world. And it is really incumbent upon all of us to think as critically and as clear-eyed as we can about how we navigate this moment. And so that includes conversations with and hearing from folks who are experts in the field, but it is a moment in which no one needs to be an expert in a particular field to engage in really important work. And so my plan for tonight as a moderator who is generally going to just get out of the way and let the panelists talk is to run through essentially 3 acts. For Act 1, it's going to be a speed round. Quick intros where I'm going to ask each of our panelists to identify the most pressing issue that is consuming their organization or their work right now. So speed round, Act 1. Act 2, and in some ways this is the meat, or at least part of the meat, we're going to talk about the stakes and the obstacles. What is at stake right now, and what is so hard about resisting it and pushing forward. But then for Act 3, because we can never just be satisfied with the critique of the moment, but we always need a positive vision and an idea for how we get there, we're going to be talking about pathways forward. legal strategies, the limitations of legal strategies, and how to work collectively, both across organizations and communities, to move forward in this moment. And then there will be plenty of time for Q&A, because we definitely want everyone who's in the room with us to have an opportunity to engage the panelists. I think for the first 2 rounds, I'll just move sort of from this side with Jessica over to Erica and then back in the next round. But as I've said to the panelists, and as I'll just share with everyone, I am inviting the panelists to be conversational. And so this is not me calling on anyone. This is really just an opportunity for us to have a conversation together, and I'll just help walk us through it. And so with that, Jessica, if you could lead us off in round 1. Give us maybe a quick intro of the work you do, building on what Raul said, and then what's the most pressing issue that is consuming your time right now? Again, as a table setter, you don't have to you don't have to get in deep, but give us a sense of what you're dealing with in this moment.
Sure. Do I need to pivot? Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. Nothing like going first with this very esteemed, distinguished panel that I'm sure is about to put me to shame. But so at MIRA, which is the Massachusetts Immigrant Refugee Advocacy Coalition, we've been working since the mid-'80s on immigrant rights. And as the name implies, we're a coalition. So we bring together member organizations all across the state, member organizations that look very different from one another. And that are service providers, that are grassroots organizations, that are faith-based communities, and that represent the interest of diverse immigrant communities all across the state. And so that is delicate work. And it also means that there are lots of priorities that we have to juggle. I would say right now, the most pressing issue in this moment is really the attacks that we're seeing on our communities as human, as individuals, the attacks on dignity that we're seeing, and the undercutting of any type of humanitarian protections that our system pretends to set forth. So that's, attacks on asylum and the refugee programs and temporary protected status and parole and lots of other things that we can get into. And alongside those attacks is the fear of the community. And so I would say that accompanying people in this moment and responding to that fear with education and information about knowing one's rights is really what is certainly taking the majority of my time in this very moment.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Rasan Hall, President and CEO of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. We are a over 100-year-old civil rights organization that works on economic development in communities of color, particularly the Black community. And we work across 5 pillar areas: employment, which is entrepreneurship and workforce development, education, health, housing, and justice. And in each one of those pillars, we attempt to provide some level of public education, some level of advocacy, either community advocacy or legislative or policy advocacy. And then in the areas where we have the most expertise and resources, some form of direct services and programming. And so most of our services and programming are in the area of workforce development, entrepreneurship, working with young people, youth STEM education. And so the thing that is consuming us and concerning us are the assaults and the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives as somehow being invalid and wildly unconstitutional, according to the current administration, when that could be nothing further from the truth. So I feel like what is consuming me is how we push back against these false and faulty narratives, but also how do we push the corporations and the educational institutions and the governmental agencies who might be cowering right now or be in a mode of anticipatory compliance to stand firm and to toe the line, to talk about the business case for diversity, to talk about how it helps their shareholders and the bottom line when you have a more diverse and robust workforce, and that you are serving a broader array of the community, but also that institutions, educational institutions, are enriched by having a wider array of experiences and perspectives at their institutions. And so the National Urban League has filed a lawsuit represented by the Legal Defense Fund and Lambda Legal, challenging some of the anti-equity executive orders that were issued by this administration. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we're not, as an affiliate of the Urban League, we're not involved in that lawsuit, but that is the efforts that we're uplifting and sharing, and then trying to encourage folks to stand the line.
Hard to follow that voice. Hello, everybody. I'm Virginia Benson. I'm the Director of Racial Justice Advocacy at Mass Law Reform Institute, which is an anti-poverty policy center. It's also the support center for civil legal aid in Massachusetts. And we strive to end poverty, end systemic racism, and improve access to justice. So very small goals. And we've been there for 60 years, and we do policy advocacy. We do at the federal and state level. We do administrative advocacy. We also train and support legal service attorneys and provide support for the field, as well as provide public education and support. And so what's consuming us right now is the demonization of poor people and people of color, and looking at the severe cuts to programs such as SNAP and food stamps, and Medicaid or Mass Health. So we're trying to safeguard all of the efforts we've had to sort of sustain those things and build them. And we're also really concerned about the potential end of federal agencies like HUD and Department of Education. And for me in my role, as we're still thinking of that, the state legislature session has begun. So we're also thinking positively about what we can do as well. So the state legislative process has really been consuming my time, but in sort of following Jessica and Rashan, I think what has been really needed in this space is community, for people not to feel alone in this work, to feel that we have the ability to continue to fight, for us to continue to support each other, for people to understand a clear education on the history of how we got here, making sure we're talking more properly that racism, not race, is the problem, making sure that we're making those type of connections. And so really supporting folks. I used to say my job a lot of times was giving people the courage to do the work. And I feel like this is even more so. So really for me is just making sure that the folks that I work with in our networks, our legal service attorneys, our nonprofit organizations, understand that they should stay steadfast to these principles, to their mission, and giving them the tools and support that they need.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Tracy Griffith. I am the director of the Racial Justice Program for the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. The ACLU is a multi-issue integrated advocacy organization. We do a lot of different things, right? That means we focus mainly on issues of civil liberties and civil rights issues. We do everything from racial justice to voting rights, to immigration, to reproductive freedom, to privacy issues, criminal law reform, free speech, any civil rights and civil liberties issue. We are gravely concerned about the Trump administration, right? And their attempts to basically undermine checks and balances. We are looking at and thinking about the things that we need to work on moving forward, but we recognize that we've been here before, right? During the last Trump administration, the ACLU filed over 434 actions against that first administration, right? And we spent the better part of a year planning for the second administration. So we're here and we're ready, right? We're ready for this fight. Nationwide, also including Massachusetts, we've already filed 10 lawsuits against this Trump administration. Keeping in mind, it's been a month, right? It's been a month. Okay. On his first day of office, he put into place the executive order to end birthright citizenship. The ACLU filed a legal challenge within 2 hours. 2 days later, we sued to stop Trump and his administration and their plans to expand fast-track deportations without a fair legal process. Clearly a violation of our Constitution. Then the ACLU sued to stop Trump's attempt to end asylum at the border. Again, it's only been a month. After that, we sued to block moves to open secret detention camps at Guantanamo. The ACLU is also working to protect LGBTQ rights and people and their families. And we sued to block an order to restrict gender-affirming medical care. And we sued here in Massachusetts in particular to stop the government from denying transgender people accurate passports. So there is no single pressing issue for us because at the ACLU, we know that civil rights and civil liberties are all interconnected, right? We know that immigrants' rights, it's a racial justice issue. We know privacy is a racial justice issue. We know healthcare is a racial justice issue. And so overall, we recognize that Trump and his allies are abusing government power to serve themselves while harming the American people. And so we are ready to push back on multiple fronts.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Richmond Walton, and I'm an attorney with Lawyers for Civil Rights. We do impact litigation across 7 different practice areas, including voting rights, education, employment, housing, and we also represent minority and women-owned businesses. I lead most of the education justice works, which includes advocating on behalf of immigrant children. Currently, we are addressing issues related to the Trump administration's immigration policies. We, within minutes of ACLU, also filed challenging the executive order for birthright citizenship. This morning, we filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration for its defunding of sanctuary cities. We're also exploring our legal options related to the termination of TPS. And so all of these issues have created an atmosphere of fear and anxiety amongst our client communities. And so we are facing the challenge of navigating this rapidly changing legal landscape while making sure that families are informed, supported, and empowered, but also trying not to further exacerbate their anxieties.
Thank you. When I'm more energetic, I'm less constrained to the script. But and so much of what you said actually makes me want to dig in and hear more. And I think much of it will come out. But we are also beginning to see overlap in the work that you do and how it is all deeply interconnected. And so working back this way, Erica, if I could start with you, and I think my question really builds on where you left off. And the question is now, so turning to Act 2. So now we've set the table, we have a sense of where everyone is, and we're gonna start digging deeper. And I wanna ask everyone about executive orders. We all know now what an executive order is. If we hadn't after the first Trump administration, now we all know, we've read the explainer and like the 3 different places. And there has been as many lawsuits there have come out, there's been 5 times, 10 times as many either executive orders or their actions coming out of the federal government, whether it's from the president himself or various agencies. And so for everyone, and Erica, I'll start with you. Is there a specific executive order or set of them or related agency action that's most concerning to you and your work? And can you outline what it does or purports to do, the impact that you anticipated having, and maybe the lawsuit that you've already filed challenging it?
Right. So when I first saw that question, I was like, all of them. But I will limit it to just 2 sets. So first is the termination of TPS for Haitian and Venezuelan immigrants. And so what is TPS? TPS is temporary protected status, which grants temporary protection from deportation to individuals from certain countries and also gives them work authorization. TPS for Venezuelan and Haitian immigrants was supposed to be valid until 2026. However, the Trump administration has issued executive orders that TPS expires for Venezuelan immigrants in April and Haitian immigrants in August. And so when it expires, TPS holders from these countries will be susceptible to deportation. And so not only is this fundamentally unfair to send individuals from these countries back to politically unstable environments, and in Haiti's case, also environmentally unstable environments. These executive orders are racist, as the Trump administration has frequently referred to individuals from these countries as criminals. He also famously accused Haitian immigrants of eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. And then also we are concerned about the Trump administration's threats to strip funding from sanctuary cities, which is the lawsuit that we filed this morning. And so a sanctuary city is a city that refuses or limits participation in federal immigration enforcement. And these executive orders attempt to force cities to participate by threatening to cut funds from cities that refuse to use municipal resources to assist with federal deportation actions. They've also threatened criminal and civil prosecution, and also to deprioritize transportation funding. And so what makes this set of executive orders particularly problematic is that on its face, they're saying, you know, we're going to stop these cities from harboring criminals, but what they're actually going to do is make it harder and less likely for victims and witnesses of crimes to report them, especially if they think that the police are participating or collaborating with immigration enforcement.
Thank you, Erica.
Just to follow up on what Erica mentioned, it's just particularly as it relates to the Haitians, like, you know, you always hear they come into the country, you have to do it the right way. They've done it the right way all along, right? And now what does that get them? Well, doing it the right way provides all of the information that the government now needs to come and round them up, essentially, right? Because they report where they are living and where they're working, and they've done it the right way, and yet they find themselves in this situation. Okay, sorry, that was an aside.
Asides are welcome
Okay.
and needed.
I mean, it really
Yeah.
is irritating.
Yes, right? Okay. Irritating wasn't my word, that's your word, but yes, I'm with you. So the ACLU's first lawsuit against the Trump administration was the challenge to birthright citizenship, right? And so just in case you don't know, let's talk a little bit about it. This is a lawsuit that we filed with our colleagues from New Hampshire on behalf of pregnant women and expectant families whose children, when they would be born after the date of the executive order, their citizenship could be called into question. So basically, under this EO, the newborn could be denied basic health care, nutrition. These kids would be unable to get any kind of required identification as they grow up. They could be denied the right to vote despite being born here in the United States. They could be denied the right to serve on juries, hold certain jobs, and otherwise be full members of American society, even though they were born in the United States and have never lived anywhere else. Essentially, this EO would create an underclass of those who have never been to another country and may be rendered stateless, right? Birthright citizenship is so important that it is specifically guaranteed in our Constitution. It is absolutely central to what America is. And the 14th Amendment that was ratified in 1868 overturned the Dred Scott decision. That denied Black Americans the rights and protections of US citizenship. It is the cornerstone of civil rights in the United States. And it's a direct response to previous legal precedent that restricted who could be a citizen and who was a slave. Right? There's so much history behind this. Every attack on birthright citizenship from the 19th century until now is based in racism. Plain and simple. And so we know the ACLU's lawsuit is one of several nationwide, and every single judge that this has come before has temporarily blocked the EO. Every single one. We're watching to see how it's going to play out. But this executive order really shows how far Trump is willing to go to deny equality and humanity.
Thanks, Tracy. And I'm going to jump in with a very quick aside before I ask Virginia to sort of continue with this line, which is to say, one of the reasons why challenges to the birthright citizenship order have been enjoined so quickly is because it has no legal basis.
What do we need that for?
And so one question that I will sort of just put on the table, but not to ask anyone necessarily to answer now, is what does it mean when the ACLU has to expend resources filing frivolous action from the federal government? And there is there's some percentage possibility that with this Supreme Court, even something that is frivolous on paper, makes its way through. I do not think that happens with birthright citizenship, but it is still eating hours, tens of hours, hundreds of hours of time as part of a broader strategy to sort of cripple everyone from being able to actually hold the line.
We will not be worn down. That's part of the strategy, but that's not going to happen.
I mean, she's great in ACLU. I think one of your catchphrases, like, he has to get by us first.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I think I like that motto, and there's a part of racial justice where you say you have to lean into sort of the being more militant. And I feel like this is the time where we really we have to take a more militant approach and a stronger approach to this work. It's interesting because I wanted to say, I think the flooding of the executive orders is intentional, right? And so, and as you can see, like, we've been all overwhelmed by it, and when you said like pick one or two, it's been very difficult because we are just still trying to get our head wrapped around all of them and see, especially when we do impact litigation, but we're not at the forefront of some of these cases. So that's intentional, right? So that some things can get by us, and we have to work together and leverage our resources, and we have to be steadfast in keeping education of what's happening and the truth of what's happening. But one I think many of us are going to talk about is the executive order it says ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. And so that is the title. And I think many of us, what I want to say about language, has gone through the executive orders and looked at the language around it, protecting women, safeguarding gender. And we have to do a better job of reframing that narrative, because to say that you're restoring merit-based when we've had a country that has not been merit-based, right? Until 19, right? It's crazy because I have siblings who were not born with their rights, the full rights of every citizen, right? And so I'm only, and this is our generation, a younger generation, or who are in Gen Xers who were not given those full rights. And so that's why important is education. But what that executive order does is basically say we're going to end any federal contract, any part in the federal government, any program that says or tries to further diversity, equity, and inclusion or accessibility. So that we've seen that come through with even having people who can get like hearing aids or things for vision impaired. We've seen the end to that.
we've seen that that would mean that there's an end to all different variety of programs, because people like to say DEI when we know many people don't know what it actually means, right? And so we have to be very good at not using those acronyms. We're saying if you have a problem with diversity, you have a problem with equity and inclusion, and defining those terms. And so I know that this executive order also says for federal contracts. So it says, and even private businesses, and many of us are lawyers, it even says bar associations, medical associations. It's trying to attack not only what the federal government has, but even also the private sector. And so there's a lot of pushback, and you've seen, we've maybe talked about, we're not going to do this all in the court. So now there are a lot of companies that have acquiesced from the get-go, right? And so we've seen now a national boycott. The NAACP has put out a consumer advisory saying you can use your dollars to send a proud message. So right now there's a boycott on Target. There's a boycott on Walmart. On February 28th, there's supposed to be an economic blackout. So in addition to what's happening in the courts, we can also, we need a multifaceted approach to this attack on DEI. And so what I've been doing is also just giving people that, there's a couple of organizations that are tracking it called Justice Service. So I've been sending that link so people can see every executive order and every lawsuit that these folks in Urban League are filing against it. So just getting that word out, and then encouraging people to stay fast to their faith and commitment to DEI or diverse. I used to use the acronym, so I have to do that. So a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thanks, Virginia.
So picking up with the point that you made, the expenditure of resources, and so that is certainly a piece of it. ACLU, Lawyers for Civil Rights, and their affiliates throughout the country, generally speaking, they're built for that type of work. That is the work that they do. It doesn't mean that it's any less of a use of their resources, but this whole concept of flooding the field, this barrage of executive orders, the whole point is to disable and disorient. And so there's only so many lawsuits that the ACLU can file. There's only so many lawsuits that Lawyers for Civil Rights or the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights can file, and organizations like the Legal Defense Fund. So they're spread thin, but that's the whole point, is to keep us disoriented. I think for now, we're doing a really good job of fighting against that and filing lawsuits. But there's another impact that this has, and Virginia talked about it a little bit, is this anticipatory compliance. Now that we have these executive orders saying private companies, if you receive federal funding, you may lose that federal funding if you have some sort of program that advances DEI. If you're trying to create a diverse workplace, you might lose federal funding. If you are a bank who supports an organization, say like the Urban League, who does workforce development in the Black community, or that works with small business owners in the Black community, or helps educate young Black children to orient them to the STEM profession, if you give a contribution as a sponsorship, as a part of your DEI initiative to the Urban League, you could potentially lose your federal funding. If you're a bank that's trying to do a merger or acquisition and you have to go before a federal agency to get approval for that, that transaction might be denied because you wrote the tiny little old Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts a $5,000 check. That is the impact of what these executive orders have, and that is the problem that is created when corporations in particular, and we talk about these executive orders, are now forced into a corner and have to make a decision about how they move forward. The lawsuit that I mentioned challenges 3 of the executive orders. Executive order, and I'm going to read the names because it's so much fun. Executive order number 14151, ending radical and wasteful DEI programs and preferencing. radical. Executive Order number 14168, defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. And then Executive Order number 14173, ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. And so I'm preaching to the choir, so I don't need to tell you how ridiculous those headlines are, but it has this impact on its base, and that's that messaging, right? This is like 6th grade at best, reading level, and it taps into the fear that people have. And I think that's what they've done a great job of capitalizing on. Our challenge to these executive orders are based on violation of the First Amendment, freedom of expression, and Fifth Amendment due process claims. And so, and we've also filed a temporary restraining order to have those stopped immediately. We'll see what happens with those. But separate and apart from the lawsuits that challenge these executive orders, what really becomes important is the role of civil society organizations in pushing back against this and applying pressure at your state legislative level, at your local municipal level, how you spend your dollars or how you refuse to spend your dollars. We have a voice, we have power. We can't just look to organizations to do the work. We are an important piece of it, but it is the people. It is the people in community who enliven and inspire and who push and who challenge organizations, institutions, governments. So it's the people who are sitting in this room. It's the people who are watching this live stream who are going to be the ones that really make the difference here. You are the wind beneath our wings, so that we file these. I'm not going to sing. So we file these lawsuits, and so that we engage and push back against folks.
Singing also encouraged. But so I'm going to turn it to Jessica in a second, but I want to uplift a couple things. One is that I think Rasan is completely right, that to the extent anyone's analysis is that we're in big trouble, the courts are not how we get out of big trouble. The ACLU, for all the incredible work it does, is not how we get out of big trouble. You are how we get out of big trouble. And so just a couple points that I've heard from multiple folks, and just to name one is sort of anticipatory obedience or voluntary compliance. What we're seeing from incredibly large, well-resourced corporations, universities, other entities who are rolling back initiatives, are caving, are cowering, however you want to describe it, based on a threat. And the threat might be you get harassed by the federal government, might be you get subpoenaed by Congress, but it is a threat. It is not necessarily based on sort of legally sound argument that what you are doing is unlawful. So we're seeing that. And then a question is, well, how do we respond to it? How do we actually put pressure on those institutions? And Virginia, I think, already gave us some examples, if I'm remembering correctly who it came from, with respect to Target. Target's lost a whole lot of money recently. And apparently it's because a lot of people were pissed that Target rolled back its, DEI initiatives. And that's just a really prime example of how you and I and others actually wield immense power to just remind different entities that, if what the concern is economic loss, that can actually come from different sorts of sides. And so a couple things, but I'm going to stop filibustering and invite Jessica to come in.
Please continue. So, I have a different version of the same story that we've all told, right? That when we were asked to identify 1 or 2 executive orders, I actually went to one of my colleagues and said, hey, I'm speaking at this thing tonight. Which one do you think I should highlight? What do you think is most important for us? And he's like, you really can't go wrong. Just whatever you want. So, birthright citizenship ranks high and also got a lot of attention. But I think in the field of immigration, there's been so much that, militarization of the border, sealing and denying asylum, the human right under international law to seek asylum, the shutting down of our refugee resettlement program, third country deportations, the erasure of, certain previously protected areas from immigration enforcement. And, I could go on. There were a flurry of executive orders on day one, and then they've kind of kept coming, usually Friday at 5:15 p.m. That's when the big news always breaks. But I would say what they all have in common, and I would say some of them come with very tangible policy changes that are likely to be felt really quickly. But others, really, you read them and you're like, well, this changes nothing. This is just a whole bunch of really ugly rhetoric. And that is precisely the point, is to put out that really ugly rhetoric. And to the point about compliance of organizations, I've seen that with individuals, right? I've trained now thousands of people since the election or since inauguration on rights, knowing your rights and interactions with immigration enforcement. And I'm getting so many questions about, well, but is it true that I could be charged with a crime for harboring if I don't open the door, And so educating people around, you have rights and these are your rights, and claiming your rights doesn't violate the law in any way. Violation of your rights is what violates the law. And so I think that fear is working at every level, including individuals, and is being very divisive, and is also normalizing really extreme language, so that when people say what might have felt, like not okay to say, all of a sudden it's okay because it's not as horrible as some of the other things that are out there.
Thank you. And so now I'm gonna pose another question to our panelists. And as I go, if anyone, wants to sort of pass in a line of questioning, that's fine. We'll get back to you. But Jessica, you were last the first time through, so I guess you were first, then you were last. Now you be first again. And one thing that we've already been talking about is language. Just the rhetoric. Sometimes it's overtly racist or misogynistic. Sometimes it's coded in different sorts of ways, but it is like deeply troubling in all sorts of ways. But there's also many ways in which the Trump administration is weaponizing both the language of civil rights and the language of equality, and also civil rights laws themselves. And so the sort of ostensible attack on DEI is pointing to multiple laws, not on a sort of legally sound basis, but it's doing so, which include the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, part of Congress's attempt to restructure America's racial order following slavery and the Civil War, and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which Congress passed in 1964, 10 years after Brown v. Board of Education, because it needed teeth, that is, the federal government needed teeth to force Southern states to actually comply with Brown. And now these are the laws that are being deployed in order to undermine civil rights. And so I'm just wondering how that impacts your work when you all, I would assume, also rely on civil rights laws, and when those laws are being deployed against the work that you do, also against the backdrop of a federal judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court, that has already shown that it is very amenable to, this sort of co-optation of civil rights law to pursue a more racially regressive agenda. And so I guess, Jessica, if you have any thing to sort of say in response, just how that affects your work and how you approach it.
Yeah, I'll be quick because I'm actually super interested to hear what you all, the litigators in the room, have to say. Mira is not a litigator like ACLU and Lawyers for Civil Rights. But I would say, well, it's infuriating, right? It makes me angry. But also, and I'm not an academic scholar, right? But the laws are a structure, and litigation is a tool. And so I think sometimes we litigate because we're looking for a particular result out of the court. And sometimes we get that result, and sometimes we don't get that result. But I think there's other reasons to litigate and go to the courts as well. And that's to stand up. It's a very public way that we have of saying that's wrong. You know, rather than just writing an op-ed or standing up and screaming about it, if you file a lawsuit, that's a very public way of saying that's wrong. And we're going to stand up collectively to say that it's wrong and try and hold people accountable. And so it's really also a tool to mobilize and to educate much more, not much more so, but equally, I think, as much as getting the result out of the court, because we're not always going to win in court. We can be strategic about that, and we should still sue, but we're not always going to win. And so thinking about some of those other things that you can gain along the way when you go to the courts, I think is important.
I think one of the important aspects of this conversation, one that we're having, but this larger national conversation, is the role of truth telling. Right? Like we're at a point where efforts to diversify educational settings, corporate sectors, are being seen as unjust, in that people who are undeserving and unqualified are receiving positions or opportunities or education. And like Virginia pointed out, the reason we even have to do any type of diversity, equity, and or inclusion initiatives is for all those years where people in positions of power were not hiring people based on merit, but at worst, based on the color of their skin, at best, based on an affinity or familiarity or comfort with a person, which is oftentimes informed by race and class. But the reality is there are an overwhelming number of people who are under the misconception that diversity has gone too far. But when you look at the numbers of CEOs of color of top Fortune 500 companies, you know, it's less than 5%. Right. When you look at most of the lawyers and judges in this country, it's like 80% white. When you look at people who are in positions of power, who our educators are, who lead corporations, who is in law enforcement, it is overwhelmingly white. But now somehow all of a sudden, all these Black and brown folks got up in the place and are turning things around, and we are the source of the problem, which is not true, but it is the narrative that exists. All of a sudden, there are these trans athletes who are taking scholarship opportunities away from defenseless little girls out in community. But when people are asked, like, what percentage of the country is trans, they're giving numbers up above 10%. It's nowhere near that. And so I think we have to do a better job of telling the truth about who this country is. And there's a book by, is David Cole still the legal director? Okay, of the ACLU, called Engines of Liberty. And one of the things that he wrote in that book, or talked about in that book, and he looked at several major lawsuits, was the role of civil society organizations, and not how much those organizations changed the legal arguments or the legal strategies, but it's what they did to change the hearts and minds of people. And so if you're in conversations where people are talking about all of these unqualified Black and brown people who are in positions of power, there's an obligation to push back against that. When you're in spaces where they're talking about women just are too emotional to lead, we've got an obligation to push back against that. When you're hearing people, overhearing people talk about how trans folks are in bathrooms to molest children, like, we've got an obligation to push back against that, but also to invite people into the spaces that we occupy so that they can learn better. There was a point in time in my life in advocacy where I was just like, it ain't my job to educate white folks. There's plenty of books and movies and documentaries and, you know, explorations that y'all can go on and go figure some things out. And I still kind of harbor that framework, but I also understand that if I create opportunities to invite people in, I'm still not going to do the labor. But I'm going to create space to invite people in to learn, because then there will be enough people who will become the lawyers, who will file the arguments, and who will make the case and lay the record clear and introduce data and statistics that support the understanding and the perspective of the rest of society. And that's what continues, and that's what is necessary, but that's what ultimately will change and save the day.
Want to like clap right after?
Right.
This is a great question. And I wanted to say, I think, again, I guess with the truth, that in education is really important. There is a phrase that they, and maybe you've heard it, where the revolution will not be televised, right? And so what that means is that you have to do it within yourself first before you can go to the community or create change. You have to create the change within yourself first. And so what I've learned in doing this racial justice work for 4 years, I was a immigration attorney for many years before that, is how much I don't know, right? And how much history we are never taught. And I'm learning every single day. I didn't understand where the word affirmative action came from. And then I read an executive order from JFK where it says we need to affirmatively act to address racism and discrimination, right? So I think part of it is just we need to educate ourselves. I looked at some of these executive orders that that Trump was rescinding, and these orders, and they go back to 1964, where folks are trying to just say we need equal opportunity in employment. Like, I never read that first executive order in 1964, and then you wonder why it took so, why didn't that get codified and left to be able to be underturned by somebody later? But I think what's really important, and it's funny, I'm having a coalition meeting this Thursday, is for people to understand what the Civil Rights Act requires, what it entails, what really our rights are, who it covers, how it has helped, and how we got here. I think you've seen the attack on the 1619 Project because they don't want us to know our history. They don't want us to be real about it. We've seen now in the military an erasure of women on their websites. We're seeing an erasure of Black contributions. It's Black History Month and labor. Every History Month, I learn something new. I didn't know that the Civil Rights, the Civil Rights Act March on Washington was about labor. I thought it was about civil rights only. And so I learned something every time, every month. And I think that's really what's most important. Educate yourself what these terms diversity mean, what these inclusion means, what equity means. I do a lot of work and, why we have to stop using words like underrepresented. It makes it seem like these are like racism and discrimination are passive, and really they're a result of intentional decisions that we've made along these last 100 years in our government. And we need to be very clear about those intentional decisions so we can make intentional decisions in the opposite direction to get us to really fulfill our principles and ideals of what we said this country was about.
Thank you.
Yeah, my former career was as a communications professor, right? Stories matter. Language matters. So I just want to back up what everybody's been saying, right? The stories that we tell and the stories that we don't tell mean something. And I think it's important for us to get in front of that to make sure that, as Rasan said, the truth is out there, right? And sometimes that means interacting with people we love and care about in ways that we might not have anticipated we might need to interact with them, but telling them the truth, right? As opposed to the narrative that's being sold. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of the level of education and in terms of how much educating we still need to do, because the history is the history, right? This is how it actually happened. This is how we got to where we are, but our educational system is not teaching that. Okay, so that was my aside. The ACLU believes that courts still matter, right? Courts still matter. And we recognize, we see that courts matter. We're seeing it play out in this past month. Courts all around the country have issued numerous orders against the administration's efforts across a broad range of issues. And I want to talk about a few of them. Federal judges in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maryland, and Washington State all issued preliminary injunctions to halt birthright citizenship, EO, right? A federal judge issued a temporary order in our transgender health care case, which allows people to still receive life-saving medical care. A federal judge also issued a temporary order blocking the administration's plans to cut $4 billion with a B in federal funding for research at universities and cancer centers and hospitals. These and other rulings have real impact for real people, right? For real families, for real lives. But we also recognize that we can't just do this in the courts, like you said. And so we are an integrated advocacy organization, which means that we approach these efforts at multiple levels. And we know that we have to use every single tool in our toolbox. And we're trying to do that. So the ACLU of Massachusetts, our action team has grown to more than 4,000 volunteers, right? 4,000 volunteers. The interesting thing is we've added probably close to 1,000 of them since this past month. At least since the election. We've added at least 1,000. Our volunteer coordinators in the back, she's nodding. Okay, yes, yes, right? Folks recognize that they need to be involved. Just like you said, they need to be involved. They can't leave it to us. And so let me put out the call. If you are interested in joining our action team, please join. You can join at whatever level you feel comfortable. If that's staffing a table at an event, if that's showing up at rallies, if it's working with us as a cooperating attorney, however you feel comfortable, it doesn't cost you anything, but you can know that you did something, right? Because there's going to come a point, and I think Raul mentioned this, where our grandkids are going to look at us and be like, well, what the heck did you do when they were disassembling the United States of America? Right? You want to be able to say, I did something. And all of our organizations have opportunities, I'm sure, to become involved in some way, in some small way. And so that's really important. Every single day, ACLU volunteers, ACLU organizers, we are out in communities across the Commonwealth working on multiple levels of input, right? How do we make it better? How do we make this better? Every single day, we are out there doing Know Your Rights trainings, right? We are out there answering questions from real folks who have concerns about their everyday existence. And so we know that we are also, we're working on Beacon Hill as well. And you all have representatives. They need to hear from you. Right? You need to be able to identify the issues that are important to you and make them known. And so along with the organizations, we are calling on folks, the folks that are in the audience, as Rasan said, and the folks that are, listening to this. We need your help. It can't just be us doing the heavy lifting. There are a lot more of you than there are of us, right? So we need your help with all of this, fighting back.
So Erica, I'll turn to you now, but first, just as a recap, we've heard at least two very concrete things that each of you here with us out there somewhere can do. You can become a member of BRJE if you're not already, and the ACLU wants you to become new member 1001. And we'll keep plugging the other action items that we can add to our list.
Well, I'd like to acknowledge that there's a difference between Trump administration's attempt to weaponize civil rights laws and the actual likelihood that they'll be successful. So far, we've successfully challenged the administration's order on birthright. Yeah,
Yeah.
fingers crossed.
Right?
We've successfully challenged their executive order on birthright citizenship. Last week, an appeals judge upheld the block. And I don't think I could keep doing this work every day if I didn't believe that we would be successful, at least some of the time. You know, I do this work, I fight this fight because I believe in both the rule and the letter of the law. And I believe that at the end of the day, the law will prevail. And so while the Trump administration may continue to attack our client communities through unlawful executive orders and policies, we will continue to challenge them.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, yeah,
I
jump
just
in.
wanted to give an action step. And I forgot to mention this, but one of the things we anticipated what's coming is more erosion of your ability to sue for discrimination and sort of the distortion of that. And so in the state, there is a bill right now, there is a bill. It's called an Act to Eliminate Disparate Impact. And so as Tracy was saying, there's opportunity at the State House for activity and support and advocacy with your local representatives. And that's one bill. There's a bill to raise the minimum wage for farm workers in Massachusetts from $8 to $15. And that basis is from the exclusion of Black agricultural workers back in the New Deal. And that exclusion was totally based on racism and making sure that Black agricultural workers and domestic workers do not have the safeguards of the New Deal. And so that legacy has maintained, and you see that in the minimum wage for farm workers. So, you know, civil rights is throughout, there's many opportunities to address that at the state level, and we welcome your participation and advocacy.
Do you mind saying the names of those two bills again for everyone?
Sure. Yeah, one is called an Act to Eliminate Disparate Impact, and it's HD 3194. And the other one is the Fairness for Farm Workers, and she'll kill me because I don't have the bill number, but I'll get it for you. It's what?
It's HB still, I haven't received a docket yet.
Right, I just don't know the last, the digits number, but I'll get it for everybody.
And part of the sort of reminder is that things in the federal government right now are, to put it mildly, bleak, which is why it's as incumbent as ever for states like Massachusetts and all of the elected officials within the state to be doing everything they can to shore up the integrity of the democracy of this Commonwealth and the dignity of everyone here. And so these are two examples of bills that could be passed that could counteract some of what the federal government is doing. In a moment, we're going to shift to a more sort of forward-looking approach, what to do proactively. Raul, I did want to just touch base, though, just to make sure I'm good about time. Are we good until 8?
We are. Yeah.
Okay, so then at 7:30, I'm going to open it up for Q&A so that there's a robust 30 minutes if we need it. But I'll ask one more question sort of in this second act, and I'll let anyone who wants to jump in because it might be that this doesn't affect you all equally, but the Trump administration, as has been referenced, is wreaking havoc on the federal government and civil society. You know, these like almost inconceivable emails getting sent, I think, from Elon Musk to people where then agency heads are saying, don't read this email. There's this like shadow agents. There's this club called Doge. It's like, it's no lawyer or law professor in the country can actually tell you what it is because no one knows. But apparently it has the key to every building in DC. Like, I didn't even know they all had keys. But apparently there's someone's got the key. And we don't know who that person is, whether they work for the federal government or not. But a lot of people are getting emails saying that if you do not respond by Friday, we're going to accept your resignation. And then they're told, don't pay attention. I tell my students that humor is like as necessary as ever right now. So I'm just wondering if any of this chaos is directly or indirectly undermining the day-to-day of your operations, and even maybe even more sort of sharply, are you worried about losing your nonprofit status, assuming you have nonprofit status, or otherwise being targeted by the federal government?
Yes. So one of the things I did not mention is we have a program that is funded by the Department of Justice's Office on Violence Against Women, where we provide culturally specific training for clergy of color around domestic violence and sexual violence. When the administration attempted to pause federal funding, we got a notification that we no longer have access to the federal funding. And so we were unable to draw down any additional funds. We put the request in. To date, we still not have received that funding. That's a significant concern because in addition to providing these culturally specific trainings, we also have a person who provides support to victims and survivors of domestic violence, whether it's going into court with people who are applying for restraining orders or helping people develop safety plans to get out of abusive relationships. And whether or not we continue to receive the funding, this is the very type of program that would be in the crosshairs of this administration. One, because it cares about women. Two, because it's culturally specific. So we're looking at communities of color in the Black community in particular. And so that is of significant concern to us. And in terms of our 501c3 status, absolutely. We're concerned that it is under attack, mainly because the president of the National Urban League filed a lawsuit against this administration. So that gives any number of reasons for this administration to seek vengeance and be justified. But I think the position of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts, as well as the other 91 affiliates across the country, is to we are all independent 501c3 organizations, and we all do our varying levels of advocacy, and we're all in different colored states. I'm fortunate to be here in Massachusetts, which is arguably a blue state, slowly turning purple, but we also suffer from liberal exceptionalism because we think that because we always vote democratically in presidential elections that we don't have these issues. But that aside, because of that, I feel the ability to be a little more strident in my critique of this administration and calling that out. And so an organization like ours, who's standing by pushing for more DEI efforts to create diverse pipelines in workforce. We're trying to start pipeline programs for clean energy jobs. Well, that's out the window pursuant to this administration, and the fact that we're trying to diversify pipelines into the clean energy sector, that's double scrutiny right there. And some of the things that I didn't mention that are also coming down the pike, but are also important and subjects organizations like ours to scrutiny is we haven't talked about policing. Right. And what this administration's position is on qualified immunity and an executive order to make sure that the federal death penalty is pursued in all states. Like that is a significant challenge. The challenge to voting rights, our ability to elect representatives to hold this administration accountable. There's no chance of the Voting Rights Act getting renewed under this current configuration of Congress and with this administration, and the value and the power of that Voting Rights Act. When we saw what happened in 2013 in the Shelby County case, where it was essentially gutted because the pre-clearance requirement was done away with, or the calculation for the pre-clearance requirement was done away with. And so now we have to run around filing individual actions, Section 2 actions, as opposed to staving off a whole wave of voting changes because there would be some sort of pre-clearance requirement where states would have to get approval before they made these significant changes to the voting rights. So organizations like this that are pushing for changes to the voting law that are progressive, right? Mail-in voting, same-day voter registration. Those are the types of things that draw us under scrutiny. So, I think the National Urban League and our affiliate are involved in a campaign called the D3, Defend Democracy, Demand Diversity, and Defeat Poverty. These are the things that we are seeking to do every day But these are the very things that will draw us under scrutiny, and we could be perceived as an organization that is challenging, that is threatening, that is receiving illegal grant funding because we're doing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and we are preparing for an audit. Last thing I'll say is we work with a program that helps train small businesses, and part of that work help them understand how to secure federal contracts. Some of the small businesses who are designated as minority and small business women enterprises received a notification from the federal government that they are, because of their DEI status or their minority women MWBE status, that they are no longer allowed to receive funding, and that they should prepare to be audited. These are small businesses that are the drivers, the engines of economic sustainability in the Black community. It's Black small businesses that hire more people in the Black community than other business, generally speaking. And so when you take those businesses out of commission, because a federal contract can be a substantial amount of revenue for them, what are we doing to the economic sustainability in communities of color, in the Black communities in particular, and in communities where there are higher concentrations of poor people? And then when we have advocacy organizations like the Urban League who want to stand up and say, you can't do that, and we need to continue to push, now we come under scrutiny. So it's concerning times. I trust that this conversation will end on a high note, though, before we leave.
I'll say Mira has also been directly impacted. As an immigrant rights organization, I don't think it's surprising to us that the Trump administration would be friendly to what we do. But interestingly, it was kind of the program that I think of as the least controversial work that we do, which is our citizenship application assistance program that was targeted through the freezing of federal funds. We just, received a notice similar to yours saying, the funds wouldn't be released. And then interestingly, last week, some funds were released, but there was no communication around it at all. And I think in addition to, withholding funds, we've seen this, with organizations receiving stop work orders around, for example, immigration attorneys that represent unaccompanied children in immigration court being told that they had to stop work, and then 24 hours later being told that they can proceed work, right? So laying people off, rehiring people, creating that uncertainty, that chaos, that unsustainability is also part of the strategy there, unfortunately.
Anyone else want to weigh in here? Or should we head to the positive vision of the future and how we're going to get there? All right, so I'll just kick it off with a sort of broad question, maybe either sort of reinforcing anything that you've already said, or in addition to it, what are the strategies or tactics that your organizations have been employing or you intend to employ in order to encounter, like as Rasan was talking, it is hard to imagine a more like open agenda to roll the country back to a pre-civil rights order than to target small businesses owned by people of color and women, many of those women of whom were going to be people of color. And so against that backdrop, how are you thinking about responding? And then how do we respond in a way that is not just about defending the status quo, which is, not worth, it's worth not getting worse, but not necessarily worth defending. And so how do you respond and also articulate a positive vision of the future that we're fighting for? For anyone who wants to jump in.
Well, I mean, I hope you understand that I can't exactly get into specifics about our strategies and our litigation plans. But I can say that we're communicating with our national ACLU and our other state affiliates, and we're sharing a lot of what we are working on and thinking about here in Massachusetts. We're working with other advocates, we're working with other organizations, we're working with impacted communities, so that we have a good idea and understanding of how things are playing out on the ground. What I can say is that we are going to be using all the tools in our toolkit. So it is going to be legislation, it's going to be litigation, it's going to be field work in affected communities. And so we're going to be working on multiple levels to, you know, and we're also making sure that we're not going to, what were we saying? We're not going to capitulate in advance. We're still going to be continuing the fight, anticipating even some of the fights and working on multiple levels.
Thanks.
Well, just to piggyback on that, you know, how were our organizations able to get these challenges out so fast? Because we months ago anticipated what they were going to do. They are playing barbershop checkers and we are playing chess and we are ready for them. We are also at Lawyers for Civil Rights operating a rapid response hotline where we are gathering information to respond to raids and also answering general immigration enforcement questions. And we're also doing Know Your Rights presentations, which includes tips on dealing with ICE in your home, in your car, and in public. And then also basic family preparedness plans. Our next session is this Thursday from 5 to 6.
Yeah, I can say at MLRI, in addition to our work we do, we manage a website called Mass Legal Help, which provides plain English answers to legal questions. So supporting our colleagues and when they do their Know Your Rights and providing information, we include all of that on that website. So please feel free to use that site. I think one thing is just making sure we stay steadfast to our principles. So I start many meetings with whatever mission that coalition is to remind people what our mission is, to provide some context. So we're doing a lot about history and data, just to make sure people have resources to support their work. So we've created a library, a racial justice library for attorneys to be able to access information and data. We're doing a lot of education about racial justice tools, whether it's framing a positive narrative, about making sure you're sort of describing, being explicit that racism is the issue, not race, making sure that you have what they call like a villain and a vision, and making sure that we're talking about how we realize our American ideals and how do we get there, right? If we say we are a country, you know, when we have our, we're a country where we have freedom. What does that look like? What does equity look like? What does diversity look like? So we have to make sure that we can provide the vision for folks and how to get there and provide those steps. So I think we've constantly going to be positive, and we're doing it at the State House, like she said, like Tracy mentioned, we're at the state legislature right now, and we're pursuing a lot of bills for housing, whether it's access to justice and making sure you have an attorney if you're fighting against evictions, whether it's trying to think, you know, should housing be a human right? We're doing things with language access, making sure maybe that the state has better language access rules. We're doing it in healthcare, making sure that there's maternity equity in maternal health. So we're doing it a lot across, and we're not going to, you know, we have ideals and we're pushing those ideals in the State House. And so we welcome anybody to join us on many multiple fights. And so I think one thing is that we're not allowing this Trump administration to distract us from what we think we can accomplish in our state as well. And so we're pushing things. I'm doing something creative now, which is requiring internet service providers to have a $15 flat fee plan for every low income person. And so we're trying to be creative and thoughtful and saying, if you're not going to do it on the federal level, what can we do in the state? And so, you know, like I said, we'll welcome anybody to a lot of our initiatives, whether it's through Clean Slate. So we're doing a lot of different angles.
I really want to echo what Virginia said, and mostly I don't want to have the last words. But our executive director went to a conference soon after the election, and she came back saying, I overheard someone saying something that really resonated with me, and that something was, don't dance to their disco, which is, it's gonna be nuts, and it's gonna be intentionally nuts, and it was, and it is. And it's on us to, yes, hold the line and fight back, but also remain focused on what it is that we think we want to accomplish and what our communities were telling us that we wanted to accomplish long before, regardless of who the president is or what the administration looks like. So, remaining focused with the silver lining that all of this has brought more people into the fold, more people to educate, more people to activate. And I think it's so important that we have opportunities for folks that say, I want to do something, to be able to say, okay, then do this thing, so that we can direct that energy.
I'm on a panel with all women and the man gets the last word.
It's not the, I've just got a whole nother question.
Okay.
You're going first.
Okay. All right, cool. I was like, did the administration's tentacles reach all the way down into Brookline? So, I was watching a reel on Instagram, which I probably spend too much time doing. But there was this white man who was in a parking lot. He was coming from some municipal building. He's like, I just saw the wildest thing. This woman was upset because she got fired, and she's sitting there talking about, they said they fired me because I'm a DEI hire. And the guy was tickled himself because he was saying to this woman, you didn't realize that you were DEI because the woman was white. But diversity, equity, and inclusion has benefited white women overwhelmingly. But there were a lot of white women that voted to end diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives because they believed that the narrative that was being told about it did not apply to them. And so therein lies an invitation to get your people, to talk to the folks who are in your community, who might harbor some of those viewpoints. And even if it's not that they are ideologically conservative or virulently racist, but somehow think the things that this administration is doing will not impact them. I'm reminded of Niemöller's words. First, they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't do anything because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the social democrats, and I didn't do anything because I wasn't a social democrat. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't do anything because I was a Jew. And then they came for me, and I looked around, and there was nobody to help me. And so I think that is the clarion call to everyone that, you might not be an immigrant, but these policies will impact you in some way, or someone that you love. You might not be trans or have a trans loved one, but it's going to impact you in a certain way. You might not think you're a beneficiary of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, but these very initiatives that this administration is trying to dismantle or push forward in a negative way will impact you. And so I think, in addition to truth telling and inviting people into conversations, some of the things that I've heard that I want to lift up is making Massachusetts the model. We can't figure out all of these things at the federal level, but we can make Massachusetts the model. And we started earlier on talking about how they are intentionally flooding the field to disorient us and to have us out of sorts. Well, we can't do it all. So pick the one or two, maybe three, if you have the capacity, issues that you're going to concern yourself mostly with, and listen to the experts in that field. Look to the organizations that are doing that work in that field. I care deeply about immigration. The Urban League isn't ready to pivot to immigration. We just don't have the capacity or the expertise, but I know who is. The folks who are sitting at this table, I know who to call. I know who to lend support to, but that's not going to be our lead issue. And so we need to look to those folks, and that will help us have a sense of focus and not become so overwhelmed. And then the last thing I want to say is, in addition to voting and getting active locally to push forward the initiatives that we care about here in Massachusetts. But then lastly, there is a professor by the name of Trista Harris, who is a futurist. And I've had the privilege of listening to her. And one of the things that she's talked about, two things. One is we need to stop making the party the problem, the guest of honor at the party. We can sit around and talk about the problems all the time, and they can consume us, and we can spin, and we can leave this place leaving miserable and worried and frazzled and anxious. But the other thing that she says is we need to spend more time ideating and planning for the future. And it is a casting a vision of a future that we want to live in, so that we can then begin to reverse engineer the steps that we need to take to get to that future. This Trump administration ain't gonna last forever, but we've got to make sure that we are putting the things in place to help dismantle it, but also take us to the place that we want to be, that is not where we started before the Trump administration, but is well beyond, so that everyone can thrive and succeed and flourish in this society.
So I do want to invite, thank you. Yeah, no, applause or, okay. In a moment, we'll open it up for Q&A, but I do want to invite everyone else if they have any, closing remarks, which, and I really just, I love the notion of make Massachusetts the model. Because we are here, you are here, I'm here. We can hold our electeds accountable. And then what is the future that we want to live in? And so as a closing comment or insight or inquiry before we turn over to Q&A, any final thoughts from everyone? And feel free to offer, I don't know, one piece of this future that we want to live in. Jessica, I'll start here so you don't have to close.
Thank you. I'll pay you later. I think I missed my opportunity earlier to plug the bills, so I'm going to do it now. Which is also kind of the idea for the near future, right? A future where people can go to law enforcement without fearing immigration repercussions. A future in which people don't need to face the immigration court system and the crazy immigration laws without due process and representation. And so the two bills that collectively our coalition is moving forward, this legislative session, or the Safe Communities Act, which many of you may be familiar with. I'll just rattle off the bill numbers since I looked them up after you panicked, Virginia. So it's SD 1670 and HD 3816. And then the other one is the Immigrant Legal Defense Act, which is about providing representation to individuals facing deportation in immigration court. And that's SD 2057 and HD 4072. And to kind of end on a happy note, an empowering note, and something for you to do next, right? Every time that I attend a panel or something like this, I'm always like, that was really heavy. Like, what's the immediate thing that I can do next? Is you can join us on March 19th for Immigrants Day at the State House, which is just a beautiful event. I hope many of you have gone in the past, but it's just so wonderful to absolutely flood the State House with immigrants and allies, and let our local officials and state officials know what's important to us.
Thank you.
I would love to plug that event. It's amazing. And also very necessary if you are a U.S. citizen or a green card holder to support and be an ally at these things, because right now lots of immigrants are fearful to be advocates, to be out in front. So we need folks who can leverage their privilege of citizenship to come to these events. So it's a great event. It's very inspiring. I say this, my work is centered around one goal, where race will no longer be a predictor of how you fare in life. And so I envision a world in which race no longer will dictate whether you'll get pain medication at the ER, whether you'll die in childbirth, whether you get eligible for a kidney transplant, whether you'll get a harsher sentence in court or pulled over by the police, or your children will get disciplined in school or kicked out of a class. Right now it's a great predictor of where you're going to live, regardless of your income, whether you'll, I will do a lot. I was going to go off on a rail, but I'm going to be positive, right? So my goal is that race will no longer, that's my vision, right? A world where race no longer is a good predictor of how you're going to do in life. And so I feel like I stay to that mission and that goal. And so that's what I envision in every bill. And I work across a lot of substantive areas. And I sort of make sure that when I'm looking at housing or immigration or child's welfare, that is what I'm pursuing, to make sure that race shouldn't be a good indicator of whether you're going to be able to keep your children or have kinship care. And so I would say, make sure you have a vision for yourself, think about what you want, and then please join us. There's a lot of different things legislative. I mean, we're ridiculous how many bills we pursue in the State House, but push them, because our legislature isn't very active. We file about 7,000 bills each session. It's a 2-year session. We just started our new session in January. We'll be lucky if we see 100 bills move through the system effectively. So we really need to count on the folks to hold your legislators accountable. And we can do it. I mean, I want to say and push everybody to be bold. To think boldly, to think creatively. That's what we need right now. We need you to have some courage. We need your creativity, and we need some boldness, because we can really create the world that we want.
So I encourage you all to just think in this moment about love. And I say that because in times of stress and concern, moments where I am disoriented or the world seems disorienting, I have learned to listen to Black women. Separate and apart from my mother or my wife or my daughter, but also bell hooks, for example. And so recently I've been reading All About Love by bell hooks. And so as I talk about the future and what we want for the future and the vision that we cast for the future, I think it's powerful that bell hooks in this book, she used the definition of love from M. Scott Peck that says love is the will to extend oneself for one's own or another's spiritual growth. And it's a very broad and embracing and spiritual conception of love. But there's this quote that I'm drawn to, and I think about the world that we live in. The policies that we see, they do not come from a place of love. The harm and the rhetoric that we see and hear do not come from a place of love. And so if we could be the exemplars, how much better off would we be? And so this quote from Hooks, from All About Love, is what I encourage you all to sit with. And it says, to return to love, to get the love we always wanted but never had, to have the love we want but are not prepared to give, we seek romantic relationships. We believe these relationships, more than any other, will rescue and redeem us. True love does have the power to redeem, but only if we are ready for redemption. Love saves us only if we want to be saved.
Yeah, I'm not following that.
No, thank you.
Enough said. Enough said.
You see?
Let's get some questions.
And so should questioners or should
Sure. For those with questions, if you're able, please make your way around to the mic. We can do a short queue over here. If you're unable to make your way to the microphone, just stay where you are. Let us know where your question is, and we can repeat it so that those in the room and also at home can hear the question. Okay.
Hey y'all. My name is Bonnie Bastian. I'm a resident here in Brookline and board member for Bridge. And I want to just say thank you so much for bringing your expertise and your knowledge here and some solid pieces to hold on to in the flood. And as we are all kind of swept away with the overwhelm. But I want to know, in all that we are suffering right now, in all the exhaustion and the horror and the fear, where do you find joy? Where do you find community? And how do you sustain yourself? How do you fold that into your work so that you can carry on?
Well, if you saw me driving into this parking lot, you probably heard me first. And so I blare my music. Music is my refuge. So, and I have to, if you say, tell me you're Dominican without telling you I'm Dominican, I like to listen to my music very loud. So I am blaring every music has been my godsend. And the other thing is community. So for instance, I emailed Jessica, I text Jessica because just to say like, we're in it, we're not alone. So I think one thing can be very difficult is if you feel very alone in this work. And, I have felt a lot of rage, disappointment, sadness. I'm going through all of the motions, and it's nice to know that my other colleagues in this field, and I'm sorry, Tracy, we'll get lunch, is that, we're in it together. So I do try to reach out to folks who I know, like, we're in it, and like, I see you, I hear you, like, let's stay together. So I think one of those, making sure you're reaching out to folks. We're not doing great, but I think knowing we're not alone helps, and LL Cool J has helped me a lot. And Cardi B, I like my ratchet too, but so music has helped me.
I wish I had something that was very spiritual, and
Doesn't need to be spiritual.
Okay. We've got this.
Mhm.
Like, to me, it feels as a Black woman, we have been through far worse.
Mhm.
So for me personally, I don't fear this, because, when you think back to our ancestors, they had no reason to believe that the things that they were working towards, the Voting Rights Act, or, Brown versus Board, they had no reason to believe that any of that would have been successful. And yet they continued to fight for it. Right. And so at least we have our ancestors to look to see what they went through, and to recognize that we will get through this.
Mhm.
I was telling them earlier, there are no cowards here. We are ready for the fight. And so it is about community. It's about being around other people who get it, who are engaged in it, who are ready for it, who are committed to it. And so looking back gives me a lot of inspiration, but also looking forward. This world has got to be better for my son. And if I can be an example to him, to teach him how to live and how to fight for what he believes in, then I've accomplished my goal in life. And so every day, that is my mindset. I look back to the ancestors and feel empowered by them. And I look forward to the world that's to come for those that I love and care about.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this and for being here. When I got sent this event, I was sharing it with people. I was super excited. So thank you so much. And my question is, and I hope this doesn't sound petty at all, but I was wondering, especially with the attack on like affirmative action and things like that, is there any way to do like a not counter lawsuit, but address the legacy admissions or like people who get jobs because daddy owns the company or, mom donated a building? Like, is there any way to make a lawsuit that's like, okay, if we can't have diversity, equity, and inclusion, which many people don't truly understand what that means, can we then go after people who get jobs or get into school solely because their parents own parts of it on the board of trustees, donated, etc.? Thank you.
Erica, yeah, do you want to?
Erica, that's you.
That's a good question, because jumping out of her seat. Because we petty at Lawyers for Civil Rights. And we did file an OCR complaint challenging legacy admissions.
There's also a bill going through the legislature right now here in Massachusetts about legacy admissions. So if that's something that you care about, get in, right? Contact your representative and make sure that it makes its way through.
Or if you're an alum of an institution that continues to employee legacy preferences, send them an email.
Hi, everyone. Hi, friends. For those who don't know me, I'm Ruth Saccharin, and I run the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And I'm going to come around to my question, which is really about the piece that Rasan brought up with Massachusetts exceptionalism. Excuse me, and sort of some urgency around what's actually happening here in Massachusetts. Just a little bit of background, we did get some legislation passed in July to update our laws around firearms. 2 weeks later, we found out that the NRA is financing an effort to do a ballot initiative to repeal the law in its entirety. And so right here in Massachusetts, the NRA is coming for us. So it isn't, we know it's not just on the federal level, it's on the state level too. And I should mention, although it's always painful to say this, the piece around language and co-opting language, the folks who are fighting to repeal this legislation are calling themselves a civil rights coalition, which is just so painful and offensive because they're calling this legislation the worst infraction, civil rights infraction in Massachusetts history. So they're taking our language. And so we're meeting that with, let's talk about civil rights. Let's talk about the right to be safe and the right to not get shot. So, but I bring this up because I think a lot of folks feel like, but we're good in Massachusetts. We don't have to worry that they're going to be able to do this. And I think they're coming for us because they want to make an example out of Massachusetts. And so I'm sort of struggling with, how do we get some urgency around this and how do we make folks understand we have to work for what we have here in Massachusetts too?
The NRA is coming for us. The borders are coming for us. Everybody's coming for us, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, Ruth, about how to engender the sense of urgency. And for those who don't know, I live in Plymouth County and I ran for Plymouth County District Attorney in 2022. And it is a deeply purple county. And that's why I made the point about Massachusetts liberal exceptionalism, because we think, oh, Boston, Brookline, Cambridge, Northampton, these are bubbles, y'all. You get outside the 138 belt, it's a very different place. The shift in votes for Trump this last election in Plymouth County, drastic. And so there's something that is resonating with folks in these communities. And I think there are a lot of us who are either oblivious to it or are slightly aligned with it. And so I don't know if there's a way that we can say, look at that, that's a problem. We need to do something about it. Looking at the colors shift on the map, maybe that doesn't do it. So sorry, I don't have an answer, but maybe that analysis of the shifts in voting trends might move some who are kind of a little more progressive to action.
I also would add, sorry.
No, go.
That there, I would love for Massachusetts to be the leader. And right now, I think in many ways we are not. It took us way longer than it should have to have tuition equity in Massachusetts. It took us way longer than it should have to have driver's licenses for all in Massachusetts. Texas had tuition equity before we did. Over a dozen states had driver's licenses for all before we did, right? So I think debunking this idea that Massachusetts is at the, cutting edge of progressive values on all fronts is also part of the important education.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I went to a lecture from Richard Rothstein, who wrote this book, Color of Law. And one of the things he had mentioned is that we have to do a better job of talking to each other about things. And, I've used my platform to just debunk some myths. And so I think that's, you can do your part and just talking to your circles about what's really happening. What are the root causes, debunking the myths and the lies and reframing the narrative. And I think, it starts with community, and our community starts small and then we build out. So I do think we have to remember that we have a lot more in common than we don't, and try to stay engaged with the conversation even when it becomes difficult. Because I'm hopeful. I am hopeful that, and I think that was what's hard about this one. I think the first time I was in my, fight stance right after Trump won the first time. And this time it was a little sad just to see, I didn't think we knew what we were getting. Or I told myself people didn't know what they were getting, and now we do know. And so that has been harder, but I still have hope that there's more good out there than bad.
We'll say closing in on 10 minutes remaining in our time. So let's do some relatively brief questions and relatively brief answers.
Okay, well, thank you all. I wanted to say this was my bailiwick. This is law, regulation, statute. I think the people we're trying to reach don't live in that world necessarily. So my question, and I kept thinking, what's the media strategy? Should we be thinking, these are people who are watching TikTok. I don't even, have I ever seen it? No. So I just wondered what your thoughts were about that. I think we need to think about other ways of reaching out to people other than the talk that we're used to.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there has to be a concerted effort to reach people where they are. Absolutely. For a long time, the ACLU is a legal organization, but it's much more than that, right? And so working within communities, building relationships and building those kinds of partnerships in communities with small organizations that are doing the work on the ground in their home communities, I think is really important, so that we understand what the issues are from their communities, and we're also able to employ our tools to meet those needs. And it is important about claiming the narrative and being able to share the stories that matter. I mean, we have an amazing communications team at the ACLU that tells stories of real people, right? And you talk about the ability to reach people. Our social media team is astounding, like in ways that I don't even begin to understand, right? But it is about reaching people where they are. And if they're on TikTok, then we need to be on TikTok, because that's how the stories get told. You're absolutely right.
Okay, I also wanted to say something that none of you said. Money is another way that none of you asked for it, but having been in other things, I think.
Well, we won't turn it away.
But I'm turning to the audience. It's a way you can support the effort also. If you don't have the time, you can write a check or
Absolutely
click
Yes.
donate.
Action item number 4, send money.
Yes, Lawyers for Civil Rights would appreciate the support.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Arno Amzalag. I live here in Brookline since 2010. I have a practical question, if you can give an advice. You talked about the preemptive dismantlement of DEI by companies that even were not asked to do it, just to comply and please the power that be. There are people that are employees. I'm asking specifically about the pharma companies. There are a number of pharma companies that removed their DEI goal from their annual report just all of a sudden. Some companies that made a lot of progress in this domain, like there's companies that had all white male boards in 2019, 2020, that are now like 50-50, and they removed their DEI goals. So now for employees, it can be a little bit scary. I'm asking for a friend to speak to your management. But at the same time, it feels like you don't ask something crazy. You just ask to keep your goals on when they have just been removed. So if you have any advice on how to talk to management to do finally something that's pretty simple and logical.
Well, one thing I could say is you could look at what Costco is doing. So Costco sent a response and said, no, thank you. DEI has really helped us in our businesses, and it's beyond your purview to come into our private business and say what we can and cannot do in this regard. So I think one of them is using that example, and then people have been, now Costco is seeing a surge in their sales and their membership because of that positive stance. And so, you know, we think about where we're not going to spend our money, but we're also thinking about where we are going to spend our money. And so I think looking at those examples, those leaders could be helpful. Say you're back again with community, you're not going to be alone, right? Being the lone wolf may, you know, put a target on your back, but if there are many folks, many companies standing up against it, then they'll feel stronger. So I feel like using them as an example would be helpful.
And there's also some labor organizing fundamentals here. So what Virginia just said with respect to companies sort of moving in concert applies to workers. It is scary. I'm talking to your friend, to go to their boss alone. But if you and your friend and 15 colleagues go together, there's much more power in that. And so part of it is figuring out how to organize a workplace, because it turns out in pharma, like in academia, like in any other sort of industry, the power is in numbers. And so my sense is that if corporations were feeling heat from a majority of their employees, and that would shape their decisions.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to say is there's a report, and I'm trying to find it, by McKinsey. Yeah, McKinsey has a report that talks about the value and the benefit to the bottom line on DEI. So having citations,
Receipts.
yeah, and if it's a letter or an email or a conversation where you drop an article in an inbox.
Thank you very much.
Final question.
Well, so obviously it's very important in your work for you to stay up to date with new developments. I was just curious to know how you all consume news. What are your news sources, and what recommendations do you have for us as we continue to receive new information from different sources?
Right, fire
Not
hydrant.
TikTok?
You know, I try to avoid spin to the extent that you can. PBS NewsHour, I find very refreshing, despite their PBS's pivot away from DEI. But Democracy Now, I think, is also another valuable source that I get news from.
Yeah, I have to say that I feel like I consume a lot in a day, and I once had to take a strength-based test for work, and I found out I'm an archiver. So I read a lot, but I'm on a ton of kind of professional and non-professional listservs.
Yeah.
I'm on Signal chats with community members that are reporting what's happening in their communities or what they're hearing might be happening in their communities. So I think a lot of different sources, but I try not to limit. You know, like I read the New York Times. That's, you know, what I read in the morning on my way to work. But then I get in my Slack and in my email links to all sorts of national and local, with spin and with less spin, news, because I think it's important to see also what people are hearing, and, you know, how their perceptions of what is actually happening is being shaped by what they're hearing. Is happening, because I do a lot of training. And so in order for me to go into a space and talk to folks, I need to understand what they may be understanding about what's happening.
I also use social media, which I didn't know what that meant like 3 years ago when a younger person said they use social media for their news. But I was like, well, how do you do that? I used to just read papers. So I think social media has really helped me. Some funny people, so I can hear some of the commentary, Jon Stewart and other folks. And then because I was an immigration attorney and I worked for the federal government in the asylum office, I actually also like foreign news to see how the world is perceiving us. So I do a lot of BBC and Al Jazeera, to see what is happening on a different aspect. But I am a news junkie too, so but I'm trying to be better, but I think social media has also helped me.
I don't think I have much to add. I mean, I just, I don't tend to look at a lot of traditional media just because it, yeah,
Bummer.
it's a bummer. Yeah, yeah. And given what we do, like we're going to get that
Right.
anyway, right? So just to actively search that out, I try to stay away, but I do utilize social media a lot. Plus, it's very interesting to see what other folks are thinking and how they're approaching the issues. And yeah.
I use TikTok a lot. Very millennial answer, but yeah.
We're just about at 8 o'clock. Here's what I want to do is I'd love to hear your question. Maybe we can have one person respond to it if it's very brief, but then really need to respect the time of all the folks that came here, have families at home waiting for them. Please.
Say social media. There's so many things that are social media.
Yeah.
Can someone be a little more specific?
So I will look at what's on Instagram or LinkedIn. We count LinkedIn as social media,
Sure.
right? Yeah.
We're over
And-
40.
Yeah.
For 40 somethings.
I'm Gen X, so LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm not on X anymore. Yeah, X used to be Twitter, but the algorithms were good to me in that they would put people before me who had links to articles or other stories. So those are, and TikTok, I haven't managed to figure out how we get used to TikTok.
Well, I mean, you gotta take TikTok. TikTok is entertainment and you have to take it with a grain of salt. And so I watch it for the entertainment value. And if there's news, then I always make sure to
Follow up on that.
to fact check it
Fact
myself.
check. Yeah.
Well, with that, I want to invite us all to give a really big round of applause to our distinguished panel. So, really
Shout out
good
to Rep
round of
San Montano trying to hide in the back.
And also a big thank you to Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity for hosting and everyone on Raul and his team.
For moderator.
Well, thank you. Thanks to our moderator, Jonathan Feingold. And if you'll give us just a moment, I want to close with gratitude and an invitation. I want to make sure also to thank all of our panelists. You're all phenomenal and wonderful and personal to me. Please know that Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity is with you. You call, we will come. And then me personally, I'm also with you. And so whatever you need, I'll be wherever you need me to be. We'll also, through our email and other channels, send out links to your organization so that folks can support you financially, sign up to volunteer, and in other ways. I think we heard loud and clear how important that is for us all to get involved in supporting your work, and we'll make sure to do that. I want to make sure to thank our board members for being here, our board chair, Kimberly Richardson, also Alec Lebovitz, Bonnie Bastian, Malcolm Cawthorn was here earlier, Zoraida Fernandez, no relation. All were here today to help us out. And special thanks to Jasmine Fernker over there in the corner with the mask on, our program coordinator, will make all this possible. Thank you to Brookline Interactive Group for live streaming this event. The recording will be available on our website at bridge.org, BRJE.org, so you could watch it there, and it'll be on YouTube as well. And to the town of Brookline for lending this space, which was really helpful to have. Thank you to many of the esteemed folks in the room, too many to name by name, but there are lawyers and educators and public health professionals and social workers and so many other amazing people in the room. And yes, there is one phenomenal, probably my favorite, State Representative Sam Montano in the back over there, who's been a champion on all these issues. Give it up. Yep. And then, finally, I want to say thank you to those who are members and supporters of Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity. Please join us in this fight. We also heard loud and clear that solidarity and connectivity and community will absolutely be necessary to get us through the next 4 years and beyond. So let's make sure that we do that and that we do it together. The last folks in the room I want to thank are some of my students who made it here as well. Thanks, y'all. This is Brookline. This is the place I've been talking about. So really glad you all made it. There's of all the amazing things that I heard tonight, I just want to call out one, which is when Tracy said there are no cowards here. And Tracy was talking about the folks on the stage, and she was talking about the folks in the room and those watching at home. We are in this fight for as long as it takes. We stand on the shoulders of giants, of others who came before us, who got us to where we are today. And we will not let our descendants down, just as our ancestors did not let us down. So let's keep at it. Let's stay with it. Let's be in it together. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.